Hello, everyone, and welcome into another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is Thursday, October 17th, and we have a great show for you today. We're going to break down the big game of the weekend, Georgia at Texas, an incredible heavyweight matchup in the SEC. Cannot wait for that one on Saturday night. Then we'll get to a couple of Big Ten games. We'll do Indiana-Nebraska, Michigan-Illinois, two huge games that could have some more CFP implications than we think right now. Then we got a couple of ACC matchups. We'll bounce over there, Miami at Louisville, as well as Notre Dame going down to Atlanta to take on Georgia Tech. Going to be a really interesting matchup, those two, and definitely could stumble those two, Miami and Notre Dame, into what they want to be CFP runs. Then we'll get to some upset alerts around the country. I got 6 for you today. Definitely some ones out there that you should be watching very closely. And then we'll just kind of whip it around to all of the different games we haven't had a chance to get through throughout the week. Definitely some interesting ones there, and we'll break those down at the end of the show. But before we jump in, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to get your question on the screen, we can have a fun back and forth here, is to use that super chat, that $sign at the bottom of the Sports Network channel chat. Click on that, add any question, comment you'd like. It'll pop up on the screen, and we can have a fun back and forth here. Definitely want this to be as interactive as possible, especially with a huge weekend on deck. So definitely utilize that if you'd like to. Also, GSMCpodcast.net is up and running as well. But let's go ahead and jump into this one, because this is a classic. No two ways about that. This is one of those games, we circled Alabama, Georgia. We circled Ohio State, Oregon. This was the other game that everyone was looking forward to, that everyone knew was going to be absolutely massive. And I'll be totally honest with you guys, a little bit of a trust tree here. This is a very interesting one for me. Both my parents went to the University of Texas. I grew up a Longhorn fan. I have been a Longhorn fan my entire life. Thing is, I grew up in Atlanta, Georgia, so I went to Georgia for college. So I have a great affinity for both of these teams. My fandom is very aggressive for both these teams. I feel like the biases kind of cancel themselves out in this matchup, so it works out okay. But at the end of the day, it is going to be a rather confusing couple hours for me, I can promise you that. But Texas, this number has gone all the way up to 5, started right around 3, 2.5, something like that, has ballooned up to 5. People do like Texas in this matchup. Over-under set at 56.5, so plenty to get to in here. And to be honest, I think this is one of those games where you have some of the best atmospheres, best situations that you could possibly have, right? You have two of the best coaches in the entire country, two of the best quarterbacks in the entire country, and two guys that I fully expect to be first-round picks when the season comes to an end, and an atmosphere that is going to be on absolute fire, and two of the best rosters in the country. This is about as good as it gets, and the thing about Georgia, they've been a little bit disappointing this year. Now, they are one of those teams that could just flip a switch at pretty much any moment. They have all the ability that they need in the world on the offensive side of the ball, and the defense just needs to find itself a little bit more. If they can do that, this could be the turning point for their season and maybe catapult them to an SEC title and maybe a national title this time around. And then for Texas, they've been rolling right along. No two ways about that. They've been one of the most dominant teams, probably the most dominant team in the country to this point. Thing is, they have not faced a team near this dangerous offensively. They haven't faced a quarterback near as good as Carson Beck, and they definitely will have to face with a lot of really, really tough tests in this one. So they have not played, or Georgia in particular, has not played great defense, especially on the back end of that team. It's 71st in the country, 227 yards per game given up through the air. You give Quinn Ewers a little bit of time to digest that defense, it could be a really long day for him. No two ways about that. Another out of the ordinary thing for Georgia this year, they sit at 89th in the country in rushing yards, only 127 per game, and Texas has shown some holes there. They've gotten run on a little bit from time to time, but if Georgia's not able to get that push with the interior that is a little bit banged up right now, I would be a little bit surprised if they were able to get that ball rolling the way they want to. Also, on top of this, they are going to be without Branson Robinson in this game. A huge running back, kind of that bruiser of that running back room, and that adds to the running back injuries. Already without Roderick Robinson, who's a hugely important player, so we'll see what happens. Trevor Etienne's going to have to be huge. Nate Frazier, I assume, will get some carries, so definitely something to watch there. Smile Mondon, the leader of this defense, really, really good at stopping the run. He will not play in this game either, so definitely something to watch there. He's been out for a couple of weeks, so if you've seen Georgia the last couple of weeks, that's probably the defense that you're going to get. The thing to watch for this game is absolutely huge. Jordan Hall looks like he could be back for this game. And if he is, it means the Georgia defensive line is at full strength for the very first time this entire year. So definitely something to watch there. If they can get him back, then this is a very forceful unit that even with a good offensive line against Texas can cause some trouble. So for Texas, the injury troubles are a little bit here and there. You got Derek Williams, sounds like he is going to be out for the year, starting safety for them, very, very talented player. They are deep at that position, so not super, super worried, but at the end of the day, definitely some players that are going to have to step up in a huge way. And then Isaiah Bond. It sounds like he got dinged up in the OU game. He will be ready to roll, it seems. He's going to give it a go, but we'll see what happens there. Definitely could be something that ends up getting in his way. And then Michael Kern, the starting punter, was out last week. Ian Ratliff played fine in his stead, but definitely something to watch that could come back to bite them if their starting punter is not out there. But overall, this is going to be a special one. No two ways about that. I think one of the big-time matchups to watch is this Texas O-line against this Georgia D-line. Some really, really good edge rushers, and Michael Williams and Jalen Walker. Definitely will be interesting to watch what Kelvin Banks and Cam Williams can do in this one. But this is a downright special one. Georgia's going to be a little bit on thin ice after this weekend if they take a loss, and Texas officially trying to plant their flag in the SEC. Going to be absolutely an incredible atmosphere, and I think it's going to live up to those first two games that we talked about, Alabama, Georgia, as well as Oregon, Ohio State. I think it'll be right up there with those games, no doubt about that. But a couple of players to watch. I think Dylan Bell is a hugely important player for Georgia going forward. I think this offense, with the way that it's kind of going, there's not too many weapons that are really stepping up and becoming the guy. This is someone that I think could do that. He's very, very sure-handed. You can get him the ball in a number of different places. You could play him at running back if you really wanted to and play around with things that way, which maybe they'll have to do with a couple of injuries there. But the reality is, this is a very dynamic player and one of those guys that no matter what defense you're playing, he can run a ton of routes and cause pretty much trouble for anyone in the entire country. So a very, very talented player, and I think he's one of those guys that could just kind of unlock this offense that little bit more, although it's been kind of buzzing lately. But on the defensive side of the ball, I think we got to see more of Ellis Robinson. This back end has not necessarily played well, especially these corners have been a little bit all over the place. And at a certain point, you got to turn to some of the younger kids. I think this is a very, very talented kid. I think obviously playing at Texas against all that speed is going to be a huge test, but I think it's someone that they're going to have step up over the next little bit, and this would be a place to give him a little bit of trial by fire, and if he steps up to the challenge, then you know you have a guy going forward. So definitely someone to watch. We'll see how much he rotates in. Could be not at all, could be a huge amount. Maybe he's the starter at the end of the day on Saturday. And then we got Gunnar Helm. He has become one of the very best tight ends in the entire country. He was incredible last week against Oklahoma. Is a really good run blocker, but absolutely can get out and catch a pass, can do some really athletic things, is a very, very complete player for them, and is becoming one of the best players in the entire team for Texas this year. So a very important player in this game. I think Georgia's going to have their hands full, keeping up with all the speed on the outside, all of the different things they have to keep track of, that I think Gunnar Helm underneath is going to be a really, really tough mismatch. We'll see what those Georgia linebackers can do to stop them, especially without Smile Mondon in the lineup. And then for the linebackers for Texas, Anthony Hill is playing some of the best football in the entire country. He is all over the place. He is attacking people left and right. Now, the thing is, Georgia should be able to keep him at bay just a little bit more because of their aggressive pass offense, because of their ability to stretch the field and bring those linebackers just a little bit further away from the line of scrimmage than they would normally be. That being said, Anthony Hill is still going to be a big factor in this game. He's been pass rushing a little bit more often, is really, really good against the run, and can chase down essentially anyone on the outside. So I expect him to be a huge player in this game and maybe, just maybe, win it for Texas because he's just so disruptive on the defensive side of the ball. How Georgia can win this game is kind of an interesting conversation because there's been a lot of things that, frankly, have been going right for Georgia. They've been playing really, really solid offense. They've been going at people pretty aggressively over the last couple of weeks, especially throwing the ball. I think Carson Beck is nearing 50 pass attempts in both of the last two games. So they're definitely going to throw the ball around. They have to be able to get on the board early because when I talk about this game, there's not a ton of things I can say totally confidently. I can say very, very, very confidently that if Georgia starts this game the way they started the Alabama game, Texas will be gone before the game starts. It won't be even a contest. I think Georgia has every ability to be able to get up in this game and play from a lead. they haven't necessarily been able to do it this year. They've started with a punt, touchdown against Tennessee Tech, a punt, touchdown against Auburn, and then interception last week on their first drive. So they badly need to put points on the board in the first drive. They badly need to take the ball down the field more consistently than they have been, and there should be openings in that Texas back end. Now, we haven't necessarily seen them over the first couple of weeks, but let's be honest, this is by far the best passing attack that they have faced thus far, and it could be that there is a couple more holes than we have seen thus far. But the other part of this is I think they got to get creative in the run game. The interior of this offensive line has not been playing all that well, and Vernon Broughton is a load to handle. So the reality is you're probably going to have to get out on the edge a little bit, and Texas has plenty of linebackers that can make those plays, but you got to at least give yourself a shot. So whether that's end arounds with Anthony Evans, giving Dylan Bell the ball just on extended pass plays, extended run plays, quote unquote. There's a number of different things they can do. Arian Smith on end around. Just get these guys out in space and allow them to make plays, because going straight up the A-gap or going even around this defensive line is probably not going to be the best way to go about it. There's a very, very stout group, and frankly, so many athletes on the outside of that defensive line that it's going to be really tough to find running room unless you get a little bit creative and make these linebackers guess just a little bit. And then finally, you got to get to Quinn Ewers. That's kind of a end-all be-all. If you do not get to Quinn Ewers in this game, you are going to get torn to pieces. But they have some very talented players. You know, Jalen Walker, Tyrion Ingram Dawkins, two very, very effective guys. 5 sacks, 16 hurries on the year. They got to be able to get home a little bit more often. It sounds like Michael Williams is a little bit closer to 100%, which is absolutely huge for this game, and will definitely give Georgia a little bit of a boost there. But I think Quinn Ewers will be ready for this game more so than he was for Oklahoma. That being said, you get to him a couple of times early, maybe some things change a little bit down the road. And then for the Texas side, you got to get Quinn comfortable early. As we saw last week, he was not quite himself in that Oklahoma game, missing throws that are relatively routine for him. And the reality is, I don't think he's going to be like that in this game, but you still have to get him comfortable. You have to give him RPOs that he runs incredibly well. You have to give him screens, and then you can open up the playbook and play around with some different things. So I think Quinn Ewers is going to be more than fine in this game. I think last week was more about kicking off the rust than anything else. That being said, if they can get home a little bit, or if they don't get him comfortable early, maybe it's one of those games like the Oklahoma game, and that just won't be good enough against this Georgia team. And then you got to trust your front seven. I don't think this Georgia offensive line is quite where it needs to be right now. Tate Ratledge is questionable for this game. I'd be surprised if he actually went out on that field. I'll be totally honest. So I don't expect them to have their full strength offensive line. Trevor Etienne has 262 of his 335 rushing yards are after contact this year. You're going to have to be able to get a little bit of a push, but frankly, if you're Texas, I would force them to prove that to me. I would force them to prove that we need to drop more guys into the box, because you know the passing attack is going to be the more dangerous part of this game. So Alabama was able to force 14 pressures against Georgia, 9 for Auburn. Texas has a very disruptive group up front. You know, Colin Simmons is really coming into his own. Ethan Burke is an absolute monster on the outside. They have plenty of guys that can cause havoc as well if those tackles and those interior linemen do not come ready for this game. And then finally, kind of the inverse of Georgia. The opening script for Texas is going to be huge. We saw it against Michigan. It was absolutely beautiful and put them in a position where that game was never really even close. The Oklahoma game was a little bit shakier, but once they got rolling, it wasn't even close. So if they can get out to a lead in this game, I'm not sure Georgia has the ability to come all the way back. And also, if you take advantage of that defense early on, you might have them scrambling for the rest of the day. And that's definitely something that that Texas can take advantage of. And it's going to be interesting to see how this one plays out, because playing from in front for Georgia, if Texas is playing from in front, Georgia's got essentially no shot in this game. And this one's a toss-up, I'll be totally honest. I do think the Texas back end is going to get exposed just a little bit more than they have been in the past. I do think there's going to be a little bit more ability to get to Quinn Ewers. All that being said, I just think Texas has too many dudes. I think there's going to be too much speed on the outside, and I think if Georgia misses that one tackle on Isaiah Bond or on Silas Bolden or Matthew Golden, they're going to be gone. And that's the reality of this game. I just think a couple of mistakes from Georgia is going to make the difference in this one, and I think Texas back end, although it's going to get a little bit exposed, I think it's going to be up for the challenge enough to win this game. So I am going to pick Texas here. It's one of those games that you feel like you know who Texas is, you feel like you know who Georgia is. It could all change on Saturday. Everything could go every which way, and Georgia could get a huge win, and then we're looking at it totally differently on Monday. I just think Texas is one of those teams that, although they haven't played anyone elite, I still think they're a very, very good team. I don't think it's necessarily an indictment on them. I don't think they're necessarily going to be exposed in this game the same way Ohio State was. So I'm going to pick Texas in that one. Going to be an incredible matchup in Austin, and I cannot wait for that one to kick off. But let's take our first break here. And when we come back, we got some Big Ten matchups that we just have to get to. Indiana-Nebraska, Michigan-Illinois, some huge matchups that could have some CFP implications. So we'll get to those right after this, so stick with us.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient. Hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing. Sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just broke down that Georgia-Texas game, the game that is going to be a weird level of torture for me given my ties to each school. It's going to be an interesting couple hours at the very least for myself. But let's get into some Big Ten matchups here. Indiana-Nebraska, Michigan-Illinois, two matchups that might be a little bit under the radar in the national scale, but have huge CFP implications and definitely huge Big Ten implications. So let's get into this Nebraska-Indiana matchup because Indiana's been rolling right along. They've been playing really, really good football. The offense is absolutely incredible, flying all over the field, but it's going to be incredible to watch this game unfold. And Nebraska has been a team that has knocked off one of these incredible undefeated runs in Nebraska or in Rutgers a couple of weeks ago. So definitely something to watch here. It's one of those things that we have a couple of quarterbacks that are at very different points in their career, but both are playing really good football. Curtis Rourke has been one of the best transfer quarterbacks in the entire country thus far this year, has thrown for 300 yards in 3 of the last 4 games. He's been really, really incredible in this offense, and it's been one of the best offenses in the entire Big Ten. So he's one of those guys that can take advantage of really any defense in the country. Now, Nebraska is probably the biggest test that he's had all year, so it definitely will be interesting to see how he reacts to that. Has been prone to make a couple of mistakes here and there, but definitely is still very, very, very talented player, and I expect a lot from him on Saturday. And then on the other side, I think this Dylan Raiola's moment. I think there's been a lot of really, really good stuff from Dylan Raiola his first season. Executed against Colorado and got that win. He played solidly against Illinois, but came up a little bit short against Rutgers. It wasn't necessarily all that pretty, but they ended up getting the win and handled that business. I think this is his time to kind of plant his flag and show that he is a guy that not only is he going to be a good quarterback for Nebraska, he has an ability to take over the Big Ten over the next couple of years. I think he has that ability in him. He's just got to show that on a grandstand. I think this is the time to do it. And then Indiana has the ability to go undefeated until you go November 23rd when you go to Ohio State. Would be absolutely insane. They got plenty of hurdles going forward, and this will be the first one. So can they step up to the plate, or will Nebraska just end another undefeated season? But Elijah Surratt is one of my favorite players in the Big Ten right about now, playing incredible football for Indiana, and one of those guys that if you find a quarterback-wide receiver connection better than Curtis Rourke, Elijah Surratt, you're probably lying. I'll be totally honest. It's been absolutely incredible. Or you're in Oxford, Mississippi because you found Jackson Dart and Trey Harris. But it's been incredible to watch this duo go to work. They're very, very talented, and it's one of those things that I don't know if there's a team that can really cover this kid. Obviously, Nebraska would have the best shot to with Malcolm Herzog and a lot of these guys, but this guy is absolutely elite in every way and cannot wait to see that matchup. And we'll talk about that matchup here in a second. But Michael Kamara is another guy to watch, a D lineman for Indiana, 5 sacks on the year. He's one of those guys that if you can get after Dylan Raiola, mistakes are going to come. He is a young kid. It's going to be one of those games where a lot of pressure is on him. if you can get after him, it's definitely going to create a lot of trouble for him, especially on the road. So a very, very talented player, one of those guys that if you see number 6 making a lot of plays for Indiana, it's going to be a long day for Nebraska. Isaiah Neyor is someone that absolutely has to get involved in this game. Very long, athletic wide receiver that it looked like Dylan Raiola was taking a very good liking to early on in the season. Did not catch a pass in last week's game. So definitely something to watch there. I think he's one of those guys that you're just going to need in this offense if he's going to be effective going forward. And then we got Malcolm Herzog, an absolute beast on the back end of that defense for Nebraska. Frankly, the entirety of that back end is ridiculous with Isaac Gifford, Malcolm Herzog, and plenty other guys. But at the end of the day, he does have I believe he has 3 picks on the season, if I'm not mistaken there. But one of those guys that if you're going to be able to beat this Indiana team, you're going to have to be able to limit possessions. You're going to have to be able to take away some possessions, and this would be the guy to do that. No two ways about that. And then we got keys to the game. Pass protection is going to be huge here because the reality is both these quarterbacks are really capable of winning this game on their own. They're very, very incredible throwers of the football. I think they have plenty of receivers to go after. The thing is, you got to keep them safe. And both these teams can get after the quarterback. You know, that Nebraska D-line is very, very stout, very athletic on the outside. MJ Sherman could make some plays in this game. And then we just talked about Michael Kamara, along with a lot of other guys on that defensive line for Indiana, are going to be able to wreak havoc. So who can protect their quarterback, who can give them time, and then whoever can, I feel very, very comfortable is going to end up winning this game. And then who can kind of handle this moment. This is kind of a weird place for both of these programs, for a lot of these players, where you're playing a game that has real CFP implications. If Indiana can get a win here, they could possibly go undefeated till Ohio State, have one loss on the schedule, and be very much in the CFP at the end of the year. And on the other hand, Nebraska, every ability, one loss on the schedule. They do have Ohio State coming up, but the reality is even a 10-2 Nebraska is very much in that conversation. So this is a huge game, and it's one of those things that you'll probably find whichever team is a little bit more just calm, a little bit more collected throughout this is going to be able to win this one, and you probably lean Curtis Rourke, to be totally fair, given his experience in the game compared to Dylan Raiola's. But the final thing here is who can find that run game, because we talked about it, ad nauseum at this point. These quarterbacks are going to need a little bit help, and both these teams are very good at stopping the run. Nebraska number 2 in the country, Indiana 16th, so very, very solid defenses, both at allowing under 100 yards. Who can find the openings in the run game and who can really get it going, because that's probably going to be the difference in who can get that quarterback going the way that they need to. So a really fun matchup, one that I cannot wait for, and one that Indiana badly needs. I just don't think they're going to get it. I think Nebraska is going to do the thing that they did against Rutgers. They're going to play a really, really tough game, be able to get that win, knock off one of the really fun undefeateds, and I think that back end makes a couple of big-time plays against Curtis Rourke. So I really like this Indiana team. I think they're so much fun to watch, but I think the magic comes to an end here. I hate to say it, but that's just the way I'm feeling right now. But moving forward, we do have a Michigan game this upcoming weekend at Illinois, going to be a huge one. Michigan favored by 3.5, depending on where you look. Over under 43.5, as it is with most Michigan games. But Michigan is favored, but Illinois is the one that is kind of rolling right along. They did get a very, very close win over Purdue in overtime last weekend, but the reality is they're the 5-1 team. Michigan is the team that is kind of reeling, trying to figure out where they stand going forward. And the reality is they lose this one, they are staring down the barrel of a 7-5 season, and it'll be very interesting how Michigan fans handle that. The big time thing here to watch, obviously, is Jack Tuttle being the quarterback for Michigan. How much of an effect does that have? Is that the game changer that they need it to be? Are they a totally different team, or are they pretty much the exact same? Are they a little bit more pass heavy, or are they going to run the ball and then pick their moments the same way they were with Alex Orji? Definitely will be a very interesting thing to watch. And then Luke Altmaier on the other side. Been one of the most clean quarterbacks in the entire country. 14 touchdowns, only 1 interception. He's one of those guys that I think has the ability to take it to another level, and he very much will need to in this game. We've seen that the Michigan back end can be attacked, so it's one of those things that maybe they can get something going in this game and possibly attack that back end the same way Washington did, but it's one of those games that Michigan badly, badly needs. So if Michigan falls here, as I said, they're staring down the barrel of a 7-5 season. Absolutely need to have it. For Illinois, they do go to Oregon next week, and you do not want another loss on that schedule before you go in. If they win this one, 10-2 is very much in reach for this Illinois team, which would create even more craziness at the top of the Big Ten. So definitely something to watch there. But Players to watch. Pat Bryant is an absolute monster. He is an NFL wide receiver, one of those guys that is giving Illinois so much ability on offense, and I think he's going to be a nightmare to deal with because the reality is he's not the only guy. Zachariah Franklin on the other side is an absolute nightmare, and only Will Johnson can only cover one of them. So they're going to have to figure out a way to take care of all of these guys. I'll actually talk about one of the guys that needs to here in a second, but a very, very talented player and becoming, or pretty much is at this point, Luke Altmaier's favorite target out there. And then I want to talk about Matthew Bailey, a very, very interesting player that plays safety for Illinois. And I think the biggest thing here is he is a safety, no doubt about it. He comes down to the box a ton. He makes sure he plays a little bit of that hybrid linebacker position. And frankly, when you're playing Michigan and you have so many variables to keep track of in the run game, having that extra player in the box is hugely important. Now, you do need to take care of the back end, but let's be totally fair. It doesn't sound like we're going to be too worried about Michigan throwing the ball over the top in this game. So I think Matthew Bailey is going to be a huge factor in that run game, and maybe will be a factor for this guy right here. Y'all got to hear me out for this one. I do think Alex Orji is going to be a little bit of a factor in this game. Illinois gave up 100 rushing yards to Ryan Brown last week at Purdue. If they can get a couple of packages in there with Alex Orji getting out on the edge, maybe he makes that one big play. And I know it sounds a little bit crazy because you just took him out, you just benched him in. I'm not suggesting putting him in for multiple plays at a time, but that one play every now and then to just get an athletic player on that field, create numbers in the box, and possibly break a big run, it might just be worth it. He's a very talented player when he's running the ball, and I think they might just be able to utilize him in this game. And then we got Jahir Brown, a very, very talented player, has not necessarily been playing up to his level this year. So when you talk about a team like Illinois, where they have Pat Bryant, they have Zachariah Franklin, you got to get help on the outside. And there's plenty of safeties that can help over top. There's not necessarily guys that are really going to be able to outright stop the wide receivers on the Illinois side. So Jair Hill needs to step up in a huge way in this game. And if he doesn't, then I could see Illinois going for a ton of passing yards in this one. And the keys to the game. What is Michigan's approach at quarterback? How do they go about this quarterback change? Are they much more aggressive passing the ball downfield? Is Colston Loveland a bigger part of the offense the way that he probably should be? All that being said, Illinois gives up 170 yards on the ground per game. You have a little bit of an ability to run the ball. So I wonder if it's a little bit of we want to start passing the ball with Jack Tuttle at some point. We're just not there yet. The matchup calls for us to run the ball, and we're going to do that on Saturday. Definitely will be something interesting to watch, and we'll see just exactly what this Michigan offense is with Jack Tuttle. And then you got to make the most of possessions. Both these teams are going to be able to run the ball. Both these teams are going to try to put on lengthy drives, and it's going to be a little bit of a rock fight. Now, the red zone scoring is going to be absolutely huge. Michigan opponent red zone scoring, 95%. I believe I wrote it down wrong here. I believe Illinois is 83%, Michigan 95%. Definitely something to watch here. You got to turn those red zone possessions into 7 points, and if you can't, that could be a huge difference in this game. And then finally, the Michigan back end. They badly need to be able to figure things out back there. They're 102nd in pass yards allowed per game. Not nearly what Michigan should be, and Will Johnson looks like he's kind of out there alone at times. So definitely something to watch. If they can't slow down Luke Altmaier, it's going to be an absolute nightmare for them to deal with, and frankly, I think they're going to be able to, at least enough to be able to win this game. I think it's one of those games where Michigan's just going to be able to be disruptive on the defensive side of the ball, and I think they're going to be able to run the ball really effectively. I could see this one kind of being like the USC game where Illinois has a little bit of a lead, but Michigan just keeps wearing them down throughout the game, breaks a couple of big runs, and ends up winning this one. So going to be a really fun matchup. If Illinois wins this one, they could be on their way to a 10-2 season. If Michigan loses, a 7-5 season is very, very much on the books, but I am going to pick Michigan in that one. Definitely going to be a fun one to watch, but gotta go Michigan if I'm being honest. But let's take our second break here. When we come back, we got to talk about the ACC. We got a Miami-Louisville matchup that's very interesting, as well as Notre Dame heading down to Georgia Tech for a matchup that could get a little sketchy for Notre Dame. But I'll break it down right after this, so stick with us.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Alrighty, welcome back, everyone. We just broke down those Big Ten matchups. We got Indiana-Nebraska, a huge one. Michigan-Illinois, another huge one. Definitely two that could have some CFP implications down the road. But let's get into some ACC matchups. And one of these teams is not an ACC team, but at the end of the day, I'm counting them as an ACC team for the time being. But let's get into that Miami game first, because this is going to be a very, very interesting one. Right around 4.5, 5, depending on where you look for that line. And this is one of those that Miami got the bye at the very best time. They played 2 games where they just needed special comebacks to find their way back into it, and now they go on the road to a dangerous Louisville team. Not necessarily playing the game that they want to play right now. Lost games to Notre Dame and SMU before getting a win over Virginia last week. So one of those interesting teams that could very well still be in the ACC race if they get this win. If they lose, they're almost definitely out of it. So something to watch there. 2 veteran quarterbacks in this one. You have Tyler Shuck on one side, a very, very good deep ball thrower, and Jeff Brom, one of the best at dialing up those deep balls. And then Cam Ward, obviously in the Heisman conversation, tons of weapons on either side, especially at wide receiver, and some struggling defenses, particularly on the back end. So definitely some things to watch in this game. It could be one of those that just kind of up and down, whoever makes the last play is probably going to win this one. But this is one of those games that it's probably the last game that's super worrisome for Miami. You know, at Georgia Tech, at Syracuse are going to be interesting as well. But at the end of the day, if they win this one, I feel pretty good that they're going to finish the year undefeated. But definitely something to watch in this one. And players to watch, I think Colin Lacey is very, very incredible. And he has kind of still been getting up to speed in that Louisville offense. But I think with all of the deep shots you're going to see in this game, to Ja'Cory Brooks and to Chris Bell and all those guys, I think Colin Lacey could be a huge player just going underneath, catching a drag, catching a deep cross, and going 50 yards down the sideline. You know, he's not necessarily going to be that just run a go and will throw it up to you like Ja'Cory Brooks is, but he can be a very dangerous player underneath, and I think he's one of those guys that can really just kind of round out this offense more than anything else. And then you got Stanquan Clark, a very talented linebacker for Louisville. And you look at this Miami team, and obviously the pass game is what kind of, gets the headlines. It's the thing that everyone points to of why Miami's been so good this year. If you can stop that run game, which seems relatively easy to stop as of this very moment, you're going to be really successful. And you're going to force Cam Ward into a couple of not-so-great situations. And we've seen what happens there. He'll make some pretty boneheaded mistakes, and then you can take advantage of those. So it'll definitely be interesting to watch how quickly they can get after him, and then can they stop the run game, and then probably attack Cam Ward a little bit later in the day. Isaiah Horton is a very interesting player for Miami because obviously you talk about Xavier Restrepo, Jacoby George, Elijah Arroyo, all those guys. Isaiah Horton's filling in all of the gaps that they need him to fill in, being a very, very complimentary piece to this offense. And I think him and Cam Ward are becoming a little bit more comfortable with each other. Definitely going to be a huge player in this game. As we talked about, explosives are going to be a huge part of this game. Maybe it's the guys that just make those 8-yard, 7-yard catches that make the difference in this one. And then we got Jaden Harris on the back end of that Miami defense. He's got to play center field. He's got to be able to get maybe even a couple of picks in this game with those deep balls, because if they get beat more than a couple of times downfield, which they have been in the past couple of weeks, Louisville has every shot to be able to win this game and possibly just win a shootout more than anything else. And the keys to the game, as you can imagine, explosive plays are going to play a huge part in this one. Miami allowed 4 passes of over 50 yards in the Cal game. Louisville allowed a 59-yard rush as well as 3 30-yard passes in the SMU game. So definitely something to watch in that one. It's one of those things that if it might just be who can make the more 50 or 30-yard plays. So definitely something to watch. I think both of these teams can take advantage of those openings. Who can do it more? Jeff Brom's incredible at scheming guys open down the field, and then on the other side you have one of the more dynamic players in the entire country in Cam Ward. So whoever can do that is going to be really successful. Thing is, to get explosive plays, you got to have time. So that pass rush is going to be hugely important. Louisville's got some injuries on that offensive line, and when you have Reuben Bain, Elijah Alston, Tyler Barron on the other side, you don't want injuries on the offensive line. They have 20 sacks this year for Miami, 13 for Louisville, so they can get there as well. Trammell Logan is an absolute monster coming off the edge, and he's one of those guys that if you see Cam Ward make a couple of bad mistakes or you see Cam Ward be flushed from the pocket a couple of times, I have to imagine you'll see Trammell Logan kind of trailing him right there. And then the Louisville run game is really interesting to me. Isaac Brown is one of those players that is very, very talented freshman, but hasn't quite hit his stride. Fun little tidbit about this game, he is from South Florida. So maybe there's a little bit of beef there. Maybe he doesn't love Miami because maybe they didn't recruit him quite as aggressively as he thought they should have. I think this could be a huge game for him to prove a point. But they have struggled to get the run game going this year. They're sitting at 72nd in the country, only 147 yards per game, and obviously they had some games early on in the year where they were able to inflate that total just a little bit. So they have to be able to get this run game going. That being said, Miami holds teams to under 100 yards a game. So it's going to be a tough battle, no two ways about that. But Louisville, if you can't get that run game going and Miami can just sit 8 guys back in coverage, it could be a really long day for you. And frankly, I think this one goes back and forth. I think it's a little bit all over the place. But when I think about that Miami D-line against this Louisville O-line, I just like Miami to make that much more, that couple more plays. You know, I think Tyler Shuck will just get knocked on his butt just a couple more times in this one, and that will be the difference. So I do think Miami wins. I don't necessarily think we walk out of this game feeling a ton better about where Miami is going forward, but they do get the win. They continue to roll along to that ACC title game. And then we got an interesting one here. I'm about to do upset alert right after this, but this would definitely be on there if I wasn't doing a full breakdown of the game. This is a very interesting game going all the way down to Atlanta, and it's one of those games that Tech is not necessarily that elite team by any means. That defense can be attacked. Obviously, that offense, while very, very efficient, can be, stagnant at times. The big thing here is, will Haynes King play? If he plays, then he can make life tough on pretty much any defense he faces. If he doesn't play, Zach Pyron, the backup there, is not nearly the thrower of the football that they need him to be. And frankly, there's a new opening in the back end of that Notre Dame defense. It sounds like Benjamin Morrison will be out for the year, probably their best coverage corner and one of the best in the entire country. One of those guys that maybe there's a couple more plays to be made downfield on this defense than there was in past couple of weeks. One of the big-time things for Notre Dame over the last little bit, though, has been Riley Leonard has figured out how to pass the ball. Had 229 yards against Stanford, is getting a lot more comfortable in this Mike Denbrock offense, and Georgia Tech is 38th against the run and 91st against the pass. So you're probably going to want to attack them through the air. That being said, Notre Dame is a running team. They're always going to be a running team. They have so many weapons back there, Jadarian Price, Jeremiah Love, and obviously Riley Leonard as a running quarterback. So it's one of those things that they've been doing well through the past. They might just have to lean on that a little bit more aggressively on Saturday if they're going to be able to get this one done. And I think the biggest thing here is Notre Dame is officially on that kind of just on edge at almost every single moment. They are on edge pretty much throughout the rest of the season because they know as well as anyone else they got to run the table if they want to get into the dance. There's no two ways about that. So the reality is they just have to worry about going 1-0 every single week. Any slip up would essentially cook them, and there's not necessarily a game you'd be overly worried about. You wouldn't like Notre Dame in. But there's a couple of games there, including this one, that could get just a little bit sketchy for them. And then for Georgia Tech, they are 5-4 against ranked teams under Brent Key, which is pretty good when you're talking about 2 games that they played the number 1 team in the country in Georgia at the end of the year. So they're doing pretty good against ranked teams that are not named Georgia. But it's one of those things that it could be just that little bit tougher of a game if Haynes King is in the game. That's the big thing here, and I don't necessarily know what the status is as of yet. We will update you tomorrow for sure. But A couple of players to watch. Eric Singleton is very interesting in this game because we talked about the losing Benjamin Morrison. If you're going to lose him, then Georgia Tech's going to find a way to attack that opening, and this is the guy that probably does it. He is so electric with the ball in his hands. One of those guys that they'll use in screens, they'll use downfield, they'll use in end arounds. He's very dynamic, kind of like a Kevin Concepcion from NC State. Just a very interesting player, and definitely is going to be able to make some plays in this game. And then I want to talk about Kyle Efford, a very good linebacker for Georgia Tech, and one of those guys that it looks like his hair's on fire every single time he's out there on the football field. When you have Jeremiah Love to chase down, when you have Riley Leonard to get to the ground, he's going to be hugely important in this game, and really all the linebackers on that side for Georgia Tech. But this is the leader of this defense, I think the leading tackler on this team, so definitely someone to watch on Saturday. Bo Collins is starting to find it a little bit for Notre Dame. I believe he's their leading receiver as of right this second, and he's one of those guys that is just a mismatch pretty much wherever you put him. He's so physical, he's so big that if you can put a ball in his vicinity, he's going to be able to go up and get it. A very talented player, and especially against this Georgia Tech pass defense, I think he'll have his fair share of moments on Saturday. And then we got Harold Cross, a guy that is just going to plug up the inside of that defense. And when you talk about that Georgia Tech offense, it's a lot of Jamal Haynes. You have to be able to run the ball if you're Georgia Tech, and if they can't, it's going to be a long day. And Notre Dame is missing a couple of those edge rushers that would make a huge difference against those read options that they like to run at Georgia Tech. But at the end of the day, if you can plug the interior, if you can keep Jamal Haynes out of this game, it's probably going to be a nightmare to deal with for Georgia Tech. But a couple of keys to this game. Who gets that fast start? I think both these teams don't really have that comeback from behind ability. I think Notre Dame obviously has it a little bit more than Georgia Tech, but at the end of the day, whoever gets that first lead and starts playing with a lead has every ability to win this game, and I might actually like the team that ends up coming out of the first quarter with the lead. So definitely something to watch there. Whoever gets that fast start is definitely going to have that upper hand going forward. And then execution of kind of a similar identity. Neither of these teams are going to pass the ball all over the field. They are going to pick their moments, though. They're going to use the quarterback run game. They're going to use a lot of misdirection, a lot of different things, and you just got to figure out who can execute it at a higher level on Saturday. You know, Georgia Tech 56% run plays, Notre Dame 55%. So they are relatively even, but they definitely lean towards the run. They definitely utilize that quarterback run game. So it's going to be a very interesting watch, and we'll figure out just which one of these quarterbacks, which one of these teams is in a little bit better control of what they can do. And then, obviously, quarterback mistakes. Both these quarterbacks in the past have struggled from mistakes, but the reality is Riley Leonard has yet to throw a pick since that NIU pick that really kind of hurt them in that game. And then Haynes King hasn't had a turnover since the Louisville game. So he's gone 2 straight games with no issues, and that is a big-time problem for him. So got to make sure you take care of the ball. Maybe it's one of those things that Haynes King makes that one mistake that hurts Georgia Tech, or maybe it's vice versa. Maybe Riley Leonard makes that one mistake. But overall, I think it's a really interesting game. One of those games that I don't think Notre Dame necessarily is going to lose. I do think Georgia Tech's going to put up a fight in this one. I think there's more ability on that Georgia Tech sideline than some people realize. I think Notre Dame, with a lot of those injuries, is going to come in here a little bit reeling. And I think even if Haynes King isn't 100%, which I don't necessarily expect him to be, I expect him to be on the field just because of the player that he is. But I don't think he'll be 100%. It could be one of those things that it's just margins that totally change this game, and I think Georgia Tech's going to come out on the wrong side. It's going to be really fun, and frankly, would not be all that surprised if Georgia Tech got that win. But as of right now, with the questions around Haynes King, I can't necessarily pick Georgia Tech. But going to be a really fun matchup, and I think both of those are really interesting for a number of different reasons. Miami, obviously, trying to go undefeated, get to the CFP. Notre Dame, the exact same thing, trying to win out the rest of the way, go to the CFP, and they are facing 2 teams that very much could get in the way of that. So going to be really fun down there in the ACC, but let's take our third break here, and when we come back, we're going to talk about the upset alerts all around the country. I have 6 different games for you, and there's a couple here that are a little bit more sketchy than I think some people are giving them credit for. So I'll break it down right after this.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about some of those ACC matchups, two that could definitely affect the CFP race. If Miami and Notre Dame go down, a little bit of chaos hits the fan. There's no two ways about that. But let's get to some upset alerts all around the country. There are a couple of games that I'm watching just a little bit closely, whether it's because of optics or history or what have you. But this is the first one. SMU travels all the way out to Palo Alto to play a huge game against Stanford. This is a Stanford team that got that huge win against Syracuse early on in the year and has not played well since. So they're one of those teams that has not necessarily, on paper, I'm not worried about this game for SMU. No two ways about that. But you look at kind of the optics around it. SMU has a very interesting kind of schedule wrinkle, I suppose, in the ACC this year, where they go to Stanford this week, they go back to Dallas in between, obviously, and then head out to Duke. So it's a little bit of an interesting schedule where they could have a lot of travel. Maybe these conditions get to them just a little bit more than we're expecting, and they're the only team that's going to have to travel to both coasts during this year. So it's going to be really interesting to watch that one unfold. Definitely one of those things that those extra couple of things could make all the difference in the world. We've seen a lot of teams struggle traveling out west this year, so definitely something to watch there. Now, the big time thing to watch here is Stanford's probably going to need some special plays. That's just the reality of this game because SMU's pass game has been very, very aggressive. Stanford gives up about 279 pass yards per game. So it's going to be tough for them to be able to stop this SMU pass game. I think it's one of those games that it could get a little bit sketchy for SMU if Ashton Daniels can come in there and play an elite game, get out on the edge, make some plays with his legs and do all that type of stuff. But at the end of the day, probably a 1 out of 5 on the upset meter. I'd be a little bit surprised if this went Stanford's way. Now, that Duke game next week, we can talk about that one later, but that'll be an interesting one for SMU, but not overly worried about this game. But whenever Ashton Daniels is on the other sideline, there's some special things that could possibly happen. And I got to talk about this one. I understand it's Oregon, it's Purdue. I fully get that, and I fully understand that Purdue should be the doormat for the Big Ten this year. But the reality is, this is a very weird spot for so many different reasons. We've seen it this year already. You had Alabama come off a huge win against Georgia, go up to Vandy, and really struggle. Now, I'm not saying Vandy and Purdue are remotely in the same world, because they're not. But at the end of the day, it is a kind of a sleepwalking factor that could play into this game. Oregon's one of those teams that's been waiting for that moment for a very, very long time. Maybe it got to them a little bit. Maybe they were a little bit less aggressive in practice, and maybe this Purdue team, I don't know for a fact, actually, this Purdue team is looking at this as their quote-unquote Super Bowl, if you want to call it that. So it'll definitely be really interesting to watch this one unfold, and the biggest thing that I want to see from Oregon is just kind of a really aggressive nature from the jump, especially on the defensive side of the ball. Come out of that locker room with your hair on fire, play really, really aggressive, play downhill, and not necessarily leave any doubt in this game. I also think the weird thing about this one is I think Purdue might have found their quarterback, which I don't know if it makes them an elite team by any means. I do think it makes them a little bit more dangerous. Ryan Brown put on a little bit of a show against Illinois where had nearly 300 yards passing, 3 touchdowns, 118 on the ground, a very, very athletic player, and one of those guys that I don't care how many athletes you have on defense. I don't care how great your profile is on defense. He can cause problems for you, and he can be one of those guys that makes that one play on 3rd and 8 late in a game that maybe changes the tide. So it's one of those games that, on paper, it's not a problem. And frankly, if it is a problem for Oregon in this game, we might have to revisit what Oregon is. But at the end of the day, I do think it's one of those that Friday night in West Lafayette is just one of those moments. As any Big Ten fan across the country, they would tell you that it doesn't make much sense. It shouldn't be something that happens. But every now and then it does. So it's definitely something to watch. I'd probably put a 2 out of 5 on this one, but at the end of the day, definitely something to watch for. It's one of those games that just goes a little bit haywire every couple of years, and maybe this is the moment, and maybe Oregon is just loving the smell of their farts just a little bit too much right about now. But definitely will be something to watch there. A&M going on the road to Mississippi State is a very interesting one to me, and this line has gone from 14 to 16 over the last couple of days, so people like A&M in this one. And the question becomes, was that game against Missouri the perfect A&M, or was it just what A&M is going forward? And I tend to believe it's a little bit closer to the perfect A&M, but I still think they're a very, very good team. And Starkville's one of those places where it's going to be loud. No two ways about that. The team on the field is not going to be all that scary, to be totally fair, but I do think they found their quarterback. Michael Van Buren is playing really, really good football, can extend plays with his legs, had over 300 yards passing against obviously a suspect back end for Georgia at this point. But at the end of the day, I think it's one of those things where he has not had an easy start to this his career at all, going to Texas and then going to Georgia. This is somehow going to be the easiest matchup that he's had all year, just because he's at home playing a team that is a little bit lower ranked than those. But at the end of the day, he's still got to deal with that defensive line for A&M, and that is going to be an outright nightmare to deal with. But for me, the biggest thing for A&M is just keeping focus. There was a really, really good game against Missouri, and it gave you ability to do any number of things this year. So definitely you want to build off that momentum. That being said, you got LSU next week, a huge LSU game that if you win that one, you're very much looking at the SEC title as a real possibility. So it's one of those things that you could have a little bit of a look-ahead spot. You could have a quarterback that's a little bit more dangerous than A&M might be giving him credit for, and maybe they have the ability to get this one done in Starkville. But at the end of the day, it's one of those college football spots. It's one of those spots that doesn't make a lot of sense. Mississippi State is kind of the doormat of the SEC this year. A&M is on their way up. They're doing a lot of really good things. I think A&M has found something. I think they will be able to play well enough to win this game. Probably a 2 out of 5, 3 out of 5 on the upset meter. But at the end of the day, Mississippi State has some firepower on that offense with Michael Van Buren, and maybe we look up in the second quarter and they're up 21-0, and it just absolutely shocks us. But USC Maryland is a game that, frankly, I don't even know if this is a huge upset alert, because I don't even know if Maryland would be a huge upset. I think they have every ability to win this game because USC is very much reeling. They are fully out of the Big Ten and CFP race. I think they're still a dangerous team offensively, obviously, and then Maryland on the other side has ability on offense. I think Billy Edwards is playing relatively solid quarterback, not necessarily anything special for Maryland, but is definitely one of those players that can cause problems for you with his legs and his arm. But at the end of the day, I think the biggest thing here is Maryland does not have a great pass defense by any means, but they are pretty good at keeping guys out of the end zone. And when you play USC, if you can let them down into that red zone, if they can't get in and have to settle for 3, you're going to have a pretty good success rate. And honestly, this USC defense is just gutted at this point. Anthony Lucas is probably out for quite some time. It sounds like Eric Gentry is actually going to opt out and go into the portal at the end of the season, so a huge loss there. A number of other, obviously losing Bear Alexander a couple of weeks ago, hurt as well. So they're losing guys left and right, and to start with, they weren't necessarily the most talented group in the world. So I think Maryland has every ability to win this game. I'd probably put this as a 4 out of 5, maybe even a 5 out of 5 on the upset scale, because it's such a dangerous game. USC traveling all the way across the country after a very, very tough loss to Penn State. We'll learn a lot about USC in this game. We'll learn about their toughness. We'll learn about their leadership, and it could be that it's just not quite where it needs to be right now for this game. But definitely one to watch. This would probably be the one that I would pick most readily out of this group. And then you got Baylor, Texas Tech, a very, very interesting one for Texas Tech because they're at the top of the Big 12 right now. As crazy as that sounds, the Red Raiders are playing really, really good football. Taj Brooks is an absolute monster at running back. He's playing the best running back in the Big 12 right about now, doing incredible things. They are facing a Baylor team that is kind of reeling. They've had a really, really tough stretch where they lost 2 games to Colorado and then to BYU that they were very much in and then just got railroaded by Iowa State. So definitely going to be a very interesting game, and it's one of those that maybe you can flush a little bit of the worries from the early season, just beating that in-state rival, being able to get that one on your resume. But at the end of the day, Baylor is not necessarily great at stopping the pass. They are give up 196 yards per game. They need to be a lot better in this game, and maybe they can muck it up a little bit, stop that pass game a little bit, and let Taj Brooks be the focal point. Now, that being said, I don't know if that's necessarily a winning strategy. It might be a better strategy, I suppose is the best way to put it. Now, I don't know if you're stopping Taj Brooks. That probably is the best way to put that. So I think Baylor has an ability. I think that defense can make some plays with Dave Aranda calling plays. They're looking for any bright light in this season at this point. I think Texas Tech has to be very, very laser focused with the schedule they have coming up to get this win. So I'd probably put it on a 3 out of 5. Whenever you have those in-state games, they can be just a little bit more juice. But at the end of the day, with the way Taj Brooks is running the ball, with the way Texas Tech is playing right now, I just don't feel very good about Baylor in this game. I'll put a 3 out of 5 just because of the conference aspect and the in-state aspect, but overall, I don't necessarily worry about that game too much for Texas Tech. And then the interesting game in the group of 5 this upcoming week, North Texas has an offense, man. They can really, really score the ball. Chandler Morris, a quarterback that was at Oklahoma, was at TCU, has made his way to North Texas, and he's been slinging the rock all over the field. Played really, really good football for the first couple of weeks, and after a really bad game against Texas Tech, has kind of found his stride once again. But Memphis has been one of the more inconsistent teams in the entire country week to week. They're all over the place, especially offensively. Sometimes Seth Hannigan will do everything right. The other time he will do essentially nothing right. So you're going to have to kind of find a middle ground with him, be able to get him going early on in this game. And one of the interesting things to match here interesting things to watch is the turnover ratio, because Memphis is +8 on the year in that category. North Texas is -2. So maybe that's the difference. Maybe just a couple of plays give Memphis this win where they very much need it. The thing is, I think this one's a little bit more sketchy. I think North Texas, with that pass offense, number 4th in the country in passing offense, averaging over 300 yards per game, I don't think they can necessarily match that for Memphis. So I'd be a little bit nervous about this game. I would say about a 4 out of 5, because the reality is both these teams have every ability to get into the American race. Memphis is trying to, get back up to that preseason hype that they had. North Texas trying to get to 3-0 in the conference and continue that Cinderella run. So it'll be really interesting to watch this one. I think this is a very dangerous game, right up there with USC Maryland. This would be another one that I would have my eye on. No two ways about that. So a couple of games that are definitely going to be worth your time. I can absolutely promise you that. There are going to be some incredible matchups all across the country. And frankly, I think when we're focusing on all of these incredible matchups that are going to be close, you have Alabama, Tennessee, you have Georgia, Texas, you have Miami, Louisville. There's a couple of games down there that might not be quite as high profile, but absolutely will have a little bit of that chaos factor and could very well affect a lot of these conference races, a lot of the different things going forward in the season. So definitely something to watch there, and we will update you with those games at the end of the week, see if any of those came true. And I have a feeling that USC Maryland game might just come true, but we'll be on the lookout for that one. But let's take our last break here, and when we come back, we're just going to get into all the games we haven't had a chance to get to. I think one of the big ones is BYU hosting Oklahoma State, a team that has been rolling right along in BYU, a team that's reeling in Oklahoma State. Could just be one of those Big 12 spots, but I'll break it down right after this, so stick with us. Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just gave you a couple of upset alerts to watch for this upcoming weekend. Definitely some ones out there that I think are a little bit sketchy. USC going all the way across the country, something to watch there. But let's get into a little bit of a Week 8 whip around all of the games that we just haven't had a chance to really get into in depth. And there are some good ones out there that I want to be able to touch on for you guys. And we got one tonight. This is a very interesting matchup for a number of reasons, because this doesn't jump off the page. I fully understand that. These are two teams that came into the year with a little bit of juice. Boston College playing good football with Thomas Castellanos. Virginia Tech returning, I believe, 19 starters of 22. A lot of juice going into this season for both these teams. It's come up a little bit flat. Boston College has kind of started to taper off. Virginia Tech, honestly, has kind of started to ramp up, but the start to the season was very, very rough. That being said, Virginia Tech finds themselves in kind of an interesting spot in the ACC race. They don't necessarily have a huge room for error at this point, no two ways about that, but they get Clemson at home later in the season. They do have SMU and Pitt. Both of them could make a run. Both these teams are very, very dangerous. Boston College has SMU and Pitt on the schedule. Virginia Tech has Clemson at home. But those are the only two games on this schedule that either of these teams could not win, or I wouldn't necessarily like them, and I guess is the best way to put it. So maybe it's one of those moments for Virginia Tech or for Boston College where they get things rolling, they start rolling downhill, and Virginia Tech gets a huge win over Clemson, finds themselves right back into the race. I think that's a little bit far-fetched, but at the end of the day, still very much on the table for them. And I think Virginia Tech might have actually found something on offense the last couple of weeks. 34 points against Miami, 31 against Stanford. Kyron Drones starting to make those off-schedule plays that he's so dynamic making. The wide receiver core is really, really deep, especially in the ACC where it's pretty much Miami, Clemson, and everyone else. Having a lot of those receivers on the outside is absolutely huge, and Boston College seems to be regressing to me. I think Thomas Castellanos is a really good player. He hasn't seen the same since that injury. I don't necessarily think he quite gets it right in this one. So I think this is a little bit of a turning door moment for Virginia Tech. I'm not necessarily betting on them to get all the way back in the ACC race, but they could get to that Clemson game undefeated going forward. They could get to that Clemson game, and maybe it's one of those that you toss one up and they get a huge win and everything changes in the ACC in a hurry. But as of right now, they got to get this win this Saturday and then keep moving forward. But I do like Virginia Tech in that one. Then we got another one, a huge matchup with Oklahoma State heading up to Provo to face off against number 13 BYU on Friday. This is one where BYU continues to roll along. One of the best coach teams in the entire country. A very, very talented quarterback in Jake Retzlaff that is leading them very, very well right now. Oklahoma State's just still searching for Ollie Gordon. I don't think he's coming up anytime soon, I'll be totally honest with you, but at the end of the day, it's very, very interesting. It's one of those things that if they can't do that, then I don't think they can do much of anything offensively, especially against this defense, and BYU is 36th in the country in rushing yards allowed. So I wouldn't necessarily bet on it. Them being only a 9-point favorite, frankly, is very, very weird to me. Could very well be a best bet tomorrow. But as of right now, I have no reason to doubt BYU. I have just about every reason to doubt Oklahoma State. So I'm going to lean towards BYU in this game. An interesting one here in the ACC where we got a Clemson team that is rolling right along kind of the same way as BYU. We have a Virginia team that's coming off a loss that effectively knocked them out of the ACC race. They have way too many games coming forward that are going to be really tough. Now, that being said, they win this one and maybe a lot changes over there, but it's going to be an interesting matchup for that Clemson defense. I don't think they're necessarily going to get exposed in any way, but Anthony Coulanger can cause just enough issues with his legs. He had 84 rushing yards against Louisville last week. Maybe it's one of those things that Clemson's defense just shows that couple of holes that Miami watches that tape and they say, okay, that's the way we can attack them, and it's definitely something where you really just want to take care of business. I think this is just going to be another notch on Clemson's belt as they head forward to the ACC title, and it's going to be really interesting to watch. But at the end of the day, I expect Clemson to roll in this one. I expect a big game from K. Klubnik because this Virginia back end is not all that good. So I think Clemson keeps rolling right along and ends up probably on a collision course with Miami in that ACC title. Then we got the service academies. East Carolina against Army is an interesting one, and frankly, I won't waste too much time on this game because East Carolina gives up 170 yards on the ground, and I expect Army to get well over that number on Saturday. East Carolina is a very up-and-down defense, played great against App State, played terribly against Charlotte last week, so I expect Army to win. I think it's going to be a Bryson Daly show, and they continue right on their merry way. And then on the other side, you got Charlotte actually playing Navy this upcoming week, but the reality is kind of the same exact thing here. Charlotte is actually worse against the run. They allow 200 yards per game, and I think it's going to be a Blake Horvath show. So it's one of those things that I love both these teams, love seeing them undefeated, and I don't think this is the week that they go down. Maybe there's something here that I'm missing a little bit, but frankly, if you're giving up anywhere close to 200 yards per game going into that matchup, I feel pretty confident you're going to give up over 200 in that matchup. So I'm going to bet on both those service academies to get that win. And then a very interesting one here because I cannot figure out why Cincinnati's favored in this game. I understand they're at home. They've been playing pretty good football, but Arizona State's really rolling downhill. You know, Brendan Sorsby, I do want to give some credit here. 1,700 yards, 13 touchdowns, 3 interceptions on the year. But on the other side, Cam Skattebo, can he take over another game? He was absolutely incredible. The Cincinnati run defense is kind of middle of the pack, 157 yards per game, so nothing absolutely crazy, but nothing terrible either. Can he find openings? you would have to assume with the way that he runs the football, he pretty much creates openings himself. So I would bet that he'd be able to get his thing going. But at the end of the day, I think this is going to be a really, really interesting game. It's kind of a ground game versus a pass game in a lot of different ways. Can Cincinnati hit those shots, or will ASU be able to kind of ground out a win? I tend to believe it's going to be Arizona State in this one. It's a very interesting game and could be one that kind of sets up either one of these teams for a little bit more success than they thought this year, but I do think Arizona State gets the win and this really fun run by the Sun Devils continues. Talk about a weird matchup. This is a very, very interesting one that's going to be going down in Norman, Oklahoma this upcoming weekend, and frankly, when we talk about mismatches this year, I don't think you're going to find a bigger one than South Carolina's D-line against Oklahoma's O-line. If we're talking about in-conference matchups, that is an absolute dominating for South Carolina's D-line. They are so disruptive. They are absolute monsters, and we saw Oklahoma's O-line for the first couple of weeks. It's a nightmare. So Michael Hawkins, you get another nightmare of a matchup to start your career. You had to play a Tennessee defense that was just terrifying to deal with, and you had to jump into that game. You had to go on the road to play at Jordan-Hare. Then you had to play Texas, and now you get to play the most terrifying defensive lineman in the entire country in Dylan Stewart and Kyle Kennard. So let's see how you handle it. It's going to be a nightmare. South Carolina does have to get a run game going here. Oklahoma is very, very tough against the run, but the reality is if Lenore Sellers is a little bit healthier this year or this week than he was last week, they're going to have to be able to get that going to open this one up. I'd lean South Carolina in this game very, very, very slightly. I don't necessarily love it. I think it's one of those games that kind of like that Auburn-Oklahoma game where as long as South Carolina takes care of the ball, they should be able to win, but maybe there's that one pick by that Oklahoma defense that makes the difference. I'd lean South Carolina, but frankly, this one's as much of a coin flip as any game this entire weekend as far as I'm concerned. And then we got an interesting one in the MAC, and this is fascinating to me because Miami of Ohio is favored by 3.5 points. Ohio is currently the betting favorite to win the MAC overall, so definitely will be a very interesting game in this one, and I think a win for Miami of Ohio would keep them in the fight. Ohio, if they got this win, would kind of pull away from the pack just a little bit in the MAC, and frankly, it's very, very hard to pull away from the pack in a conference that just absolutely cannibalizes each other. It's a really, really wild conference, and probably one of the reasons it's one of my favorite conferences in the country. But overall, I think the big thing in this game for Miami, Ohio is getting that run game going. The two games they've had Keon Mosey get over 100 yards. They've been able to win those games. Now, Ohio is stout against the run. They've been only allowing 118 yards per game, so it's going to be tough to get there, but the reality is if Miami of Ohio can't run the ball, then Blaine Gabbert's going to have a really, really tough job getting the ball where he needs to get it to, or Brett Gabbert. One of the two. They're brothers, so I get them a little bit confused. But at the end of the day, that quarterback definitely needs to be able to get a little bit of time, and that run game is going to be huge for him to do that. And on the other side, Ohio is being led by Parker Navarro, a very, very good dual threat quarterback, over 900 or nearly 900 yards passing, 400 yards on the ground. He is all over the place. I do like Ohio by a hair. I think if Miami of Ohio wins this one, the MAC race becomes like a 6-horse race. It's going to be an absolute nightmare down the stretch of that one. And another player to watch is Coleman Owen, a very talented player for Ohio. So definitely something to watch there. I do think Ohio wins this one, but Miami of Ohio has every ability to get this one done. And then you got chaos in the MAC as you do pretty much every single year. And this one could add to it just a little bit more. This is an elite matchup between two teams that are number 2 and 3 in the odds to win the MAC right about now. So it's going to be really interesting to watch this one unfold, and a lot of talent on both sides of the offense, particularly on Toledo, but Northern Illinois has got plenty of guys as well, so no doubt about that. Toledo is coming off a loss to Buffalo, definitely something that they need to get back on track. Tucker Gleason is playing some pretty good football for them at quarterback, and then you got Jawan Newton on the outside, 517 yards, 7 touchdowns on the year. Plenty of talent on the outside for Toledo, and I expect them to be a little bit more of an aggressive pass team than Northern Illinois in this game because the running back duo for Northern Illinois is downright special. Gavin Williams and Ontario Brown both have over 400 yards on the year, and they are as dangerous as they get in the entire country. I think with this game, they have every ability to take over, and Toledo's been solid against the run. I think these guys are just too much for them. I like NIU in a very, very close game, and I think them and probably Ohio end up being the teams to beat in the MAC going forward. And then we got this matchup. Iowa State hosts UCF in a very, very weird place for the Black Knights because they made a quarterback change last week. Ja'Cory Brown made the start. for them in that game, and I think he'll make the start in this one. E.J. Colson's being thrown around as a possibility, but I would assume that he's going to be the starter for this game. And going into Ames, Iowa is not an easy place to go for your very first start. So definitely something to watch there. I think last week it was West Virginia getting over 200. Last week I said, breaking down that Iowa State-West Virginia game, said West Virginia badly needs to get over 200 yards rushing if they're going to have pretty much any shot to beat Iowa State. I would say the exact same here, and maybe a little bit more aggressively on the ground, to be totally honest. Iowa State's only allowing 132 yards on the ground per game. I don't think it's going to be all that pretty for UCF, and frankly, not a lot has been all that pretty for UCF. Now, UCF is very good against the run. They're terrible against the pass. So I think this is that game where Jaden Higgins, Jalen Noel get over 100 yards. This Iowa State offense kind of flexes their muscles just a little bit more through the air, and they kind of show everyone that they have that next gear to get to. So I do like Iowa State. I like them pretty comfortably. Maybe that's one of my best bets tomorrow. So definitely be on the lookout for that. But a lot of really fun games this upcoming weekend. I have Texas beating Georgia. It's going to be an incredible matchup over there in Austin. I just think with that speed that Texas has, it's going to be a load to deal with for that Georgia back end. But that'll do it for this edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It does make a huge difference for us. Also, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all the social pages for all the content and updates you could possibly need. We have really incredible people doing awesome work across every single sport you could want. So whether it's the NFL or the NBA or anything in between, come on over to GSMC and we have you totally covered. But thank you once again for listening, and I will see you guys tomorrow.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.